Good morning and welcome to the 7th meeting in 2025 of the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee. I remind all members and witnesses to ensure that their devices are on silent. The first item of our agenda is to decide whether to take items 4 and 5 in private. Are members agreed? We're all agreed, thank you. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence as part of our inquiry on the council tax system in Scotland. And I welcome our witnesses to the meeting. We have around 75 minutes for this discussion, and we're joined by Shona Robson, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government, and the Cabinet Secretary is joined by Scottish Government officials, Ellen Lever, who's the Acting Director for Local Government, and David Storey, who's the Head of Local Taxation Policy. And we're also joined by Councillor Katie Hagman, who's the Resources Spokesperson at COSLA, and Katie is joined by Mirren Kelly, who's the Chief Officer of Local Government Finance at COSLA. And we're going to turn to questions from members. I'm going to begin. So I want to just cast our memories back to the 2015 Commission on Local Tax Reform, which was a major piece of work involving consultation, research and cross-party engagement. And I'd be interested to understand from yourselves, and maybe I'll start with the Cabinet Secretary, why you think this ultimately failed to lead to any significant changes.
So first of all, I think there was a lot of good work carried out through the Commission on Local Tax Reform in 2015. Now, of course, that Commission didn't recommend any specific form of taxation to replace the council tax, but it did unpack a lot of issues, and they expressed a predominant view that local tax should continue to include some sort of domestic property tax, with a new system that's more progressive than the council tax. I think really the issue then is probably the issue now around consensus, which is why I've been pretty upfront and honest about saying that I don't think we'll be able to move forward unless we're able to build enough consensus about not just identifying the problem. So, everybody will agree that 1991 property values are out of date and something needs to be done about it. Everyone will agree that the current council tax system isn't as progressive as it should be, and it needs to be improved. The difficulty is then, well, what comes next in terms of those improvements? And I think I'm quite optimistic that I think we could genuinely try to build some consensus around the principles of where we agree. There'll be lots that we would disagree upon, but I think there can be areas that we could agree upon that could begin to make some change. And it might be not a big bang, massive replacement to the council tax, but if incremental steps could be made that we could agree upon that addresses some of the issues of progressivity, for example, then I would hope that we would be able to find areas of agreement. So that is, in essence, what Katie and I are keen to do, and it will remain to be seen where we get with that. But that's it, really.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. Yes, certainly, political will came up quite strongly in our previous sessions around this issue. I'm going to actually bring in my second question and direct it to you, Katie. COSLA's letter to the committee states its intentions to work with council leaders to develop cross-party support for reform. And given the political makeup of Scotland's councils and the wide range of views, be interested to understand how you intend to approach that.
Yeah, no, good morning, and
good morning.
Thank you for that. I think you'll probably hear the word consensus a lot from myself and the Cabinet Secretary this morning, because ultimately we need to get that to move forward, and you referenced their political will. So we absolutely need to bring everybody with us. I think you know, everybody has an opinion and a thought on council tax, and certainly, as you've quite rightly pointed out, we need to have that consensus in local government. There's no one political party majority in local government, so you know, we need to bring all our councils, all our leaders with us on this journey going forward. So we have regular updates to our leaders' meetings every month. And certainly we had an update just last Friday, of which allows us to progress the next stage. I think there's a feeling of everybody wants this to move at pace, but in order for us to move at pace, we do need to bring that consensus as well. So one of the points that was agreed at leaders last week was that we're going to take a piece of work to our convention in March. So convention brings in the wider local government family. So it's not just leaders, but there's political representatives from every local authority and every party. And while it wouldn't necessarily be for convention to agree stages as such, it is about that information sharing and ensuring that we can all move forward together. So clearly there is a piece of work that needs to be done, but certainly we've got plans in place to do that, and the first stage will be at our convention in March, so that all councillors can feel a part of this process.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. It's very helpful to know that that's part of the process. Maybe a question for both of you, and I'll start with Katie. Just out of curiosity, why do you think other taxation and public finance changes take place without, they kind of seem to take place without political consensus? For example, income tax. What do you have? What's your sense of the difference with council tax? Why is that one where we need to take everybody with us?
I think for me, council tax is such a visible tax that everybody is aware of. You know, every household in Scotland gets a letter. We have a legal duty as local authorities to set out that notice, and it is just it's one of the most visible taxes that we all pay and we all face, and it is something that has a huge amount of interest from people because, you know, they're paying it on a monthly basis. You know, clearly if those on lower incomes can't afford, there are mitigations and there's support for those on the lowest of incomes. But it's so prominent in everybody's lives that this is, as I say, you only need to look at the newspapers in the last couple of weeks to see the media interest in council tax. So, you know, whether we like it or not, people it's a tax that everybody can grasp. They feel the tangible payments going out every month as such. So, yeah, in a way, income tax and other forms of taxation that maybe comes out of wages, people don't see it as much.
It's interesting though, because it does come out of people's wages, so they must see it. But there's something about council tax being very prominent, isn't there? I actually was wondering, in reflection on our previous sessions, that maybe it's because it's got a historical link to the poll tax, which was so controversial, and maybe that's it. Shona, do you have anything to add?
There might be something around that. I think people probably have quite a strong reaction to taxes generally. But I think Katie's point about the visibility, the fact that it is a tax that spans two spheres of government, so the interaction between the actions that that Scottish Parliament would take, and of course any major changes to council tax would require legislation, going back to that consensus point. So I do think there's something about the complexity of council tax, and there maybe is a kind of historic kind of legacy of and a lot of media attention, as Katie pointed out. So it's tricky.
It is unfortunate. You're just picking up on your comment about people reacting about tax. It's such an unfortunate situation that we're in a way, because if we want to be a modern progressive Scotland, and we often look to the Nordic countries, then taxation is actually really important, isn't it, for all the public services that make life good for everybody. So it's something about how do we also, in this process of looking at the council tax, maybe there's an opportunity also to help people understand better what it does and what it does.
Yeah, I think actually local government have made a lot of efforts in that direction. So I see a lot of local authorities setting out in some detail what local council tax payers, if you like, can expect to receive from the investment that's been made. Now, clearly, local government services are funded through a hybrid of funds, and council tax is just one element of it. But I do think there is something about being quite front-footed around setting out what the council tax is going to contribute to delivering. And I've seen some really good examples of that across local authorities doing that more and more.
That sounds great. I'm just going to bring in Alexander Stewart with a brief supplementary.
Thank you, Convener. There is no doubt across the political landscape there's a will for things to happen, but it's finding the way to ensure that is the progress, and that's what you've touched on today. And in the timescales that are left for this Parliament over the next sort of 15 months or so, how realistic are we in achieving some of that? I know you've talked about having a convention in March, and then if there are proposals that come forward, where would we actually get to the point where we think we can actually achieve something, or would it be seen as happening in Session 7 that things come to fruition?
I think realistically any actual practical changes would be in the next Parliament, but laying the groundwork in this Parliament for a willingness to create some consensus to move forward, because without that we could see another parliamentary session with then property values being, you know, another 5 years out of date and nothing changing and bans not changing and, you know, no move. And I'm just keen to explore the art of the possible here, because I think you're right that everybody accepts the problem and what changes are required, and there are ways of giving changes quite a very soft landing that would bring the public with us. So it's not just about building political consensus to do something to the public, which is why the consultation and public events are very much about engaging the public themselves around what are the options and what would be acceptable, what could make the system fairer, and how would that land in a way that you know, deals with some of the obvious problems that might arise. So I think that would be quite an achievement in itself, to create a better landing space for the actual proposals that could then go forward in the next Parliament, because it would require a lot of detailed work, and there's technical work, and then it would require legislation, and that by its nature is going to require consensus of some degree. Yeah. So,
okay, thank you.
Heard in I think the last session, the last panel, that it would take about 3 years once the session begins. So exactly that need for doing this upfront work, so that we can actually come out at the beginning of Session 7 with moving forward on it. Sounds like it would be good. So I wonder if in your collaboration together you have in mind the fact that we do have an election coming up and there's manifestos being written and things like that. So are you considering that in your timeline? Katie, do you want to?
No, I can certainly come in, and certainly these points have been well trailed and discussed by COSLA leaders. You know, we're acutely aware of the timeline, and certainly there is this phrase that comes up often is there's a real desire to move at pace with this work, noting how the legislation works. I think it is important to just, take a breath as well, though, and look that we have made progress in terms of the second home and the 100% increase that's available for council tax. So that work has progressed. We did do a significant piece of work on multipliers and looking at different bandings, and obviously we had to take a sounding on that, and that generated a lot of interest, as I'm sure you're all well aware. So we have got a proposed series of engagements that are going to take place over the the summer and conclude, so that we can then progress this. But I think that the point on the timing is not lost, and it's one that COSLA leaders are acutely aware of. And, you know, we're all well aware that parliamentary elections are going to be taking place, and manifestos are going to be written, and that's a piece of work that certainly COSLA is doing right now in terms of engaging with all the political parties to ensure that these priorities feature across all the political manifestos going forward.
And just to come back on my first question around the 2015 Commission on Local Tax Reform, be interested to know, so Shona, you were saying that it had some very good recommendations, but it didn't propose anything specific. But I just want to make sure, I mean, it did have good recommendations, and I wanted to just get a sense of how much are you going to be looking at those recommendations as part of this process rather than reinventing the wheel? Or
Yeah, so I think it's worth, you know, dusting down some of the work that was done and not repeating some of the work that was done. And I think the fact that there was a conclusion that there needed to be, you know, local tax had to include some form of domestic property tax is in itself not unhelpful. So there's a lot there in the, I think, in the Commission's work that could be drawn upon, but it needs then to address the fundamental issue that any change is only by its nature going to progress if there's enough political support for it. And that, you know, keep coming back to this, but it's just a fact. And what Katie and I are keen to do in our respective kind of roles is to see what the art of the possible is there. And I just think doing nothing and having a position of no change is not sustainable. So if we all agree that, then where can we move to?
Okay, good. That's good to hear that you recognise that. I'm going to move on, bring in other members. So, Willie.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary, Councillor Hagman and colleagues. I wonder if I could just firstly ask you, Councillor Hagman, about the convention that's planned for March. I think it would be fair to say that our committee here thought that the best we could possibly achieve is some kind of agreement and broad principles as well to take us forward. And you mentioned that yourself, that it might be the purpose of the convention in March. Is that something that's been rolled out to all the participant political parties to get them to think in that space about what consensus might look like so that we can move it forward? Yeah,
so I think the role of convention is to set the strategic direction for councils. I'm acutely aware that council leaders meet every month, but that's just one councillor from each of the local authorities. So convention allows us to all come together, and it's absolutely vital. So COSLA leaders agreed on Friday that we will take this to convention. So that is an action that is absolutely happening. I think we're still developing the programme of how that's going to work, and it will be a chance to, you know, perhaps have some workshops, to get some speakers, get some of our professional advisors, and really lay out what the process is going to be. Because I'm acutely aware we've got councillors all over Scotland who might not always be aware of what's being discussed on the floor of COSLA leaders. So it is absolutely vital that where we've got that platform, where we've got that ability to come together, we use that. So that's why it was really important that leaders agreed, and all political parties will be there, whether they're in administration, whether they're in opposition, whether they're independent councillors. Everybody is represented at COSLA Convention.
Great, good. And Cabinet Secretary, turning to yourself, you've probably heard or seen the evidence from our Welsh colleagues last week and so on, and we heard that one of the main motivation for them has been to put fairness at the heart of their council tax system. But they've managed to progress with it and deliver changes that we haven't managed to do in Scotland. Why do you think that was?
So I think, so first of all, there are things we can learn from the Welsh experience. I had a good discussion with Mark Drakeford in the bilateral meeting, who's the finance minister now, and Welsh Government at the meeting of the finance ministers from across the UK. We had a bilateral, and actually we talked about the progress that they'd made. He had some reflections about things that perhaps they would have done differently. So, for example, the transitional arrangements were sort of retrofitted after there was quite a hullabaloo, if you like, about, you know, the losers out of the revaluation. And I think there are lessons there that any changes going forward, you would build in right from the start transitional arrangements that would you know, give a soft landing to those changes. They're also looking at further bans, and I think there is something about the looking at, you know, how many additional bans may be required to make the Scottish system more progressive, and we could look at how the Welsh system worked. I mean, it's perhaps you know, down to the, you know, political arithmetic has, you know, changed over the course of their parliament and our parliament, I guess you could argue. So, you know, it's not been without its difficulties, and you know, they are. When you look at the budget situation and for the Welsh Government, you know, securing their budget with one vote. If they were trying to make some of these changes now, I just wonder whether it would land in the same political environment that it did when they embarked on the consultation on revaluation. I guess I'm just surmising that, you know, opportunities for changes like this, you know, will ebb and flow depending on the relationships and goodwill within parliaments. But let me repeat again, I think there's a lot of good evidence we can take and lessons learned from the good aspects of how Wales did it, but also things they would say themselves in hindsight they might have done a bit differently.
Okay. You mentioned banding systems, and we think the Welsh added another band I, and we made, I suppose, a valiant attempt to adjust the multipliers in the upper 4 bands. Do you still see a banding system as being at the cornerstone, the heart of this process, or is that even in itself up for debate and discussion?
Well, they are now adding some additional bands in their next iteration. So I think adding additional bands would help with the progressivity, which is a bit different from what the multiplier was quite a different proposition. That was about the relative payment of existing bands because of the fact that those in lower bands pay a higher proportion of their income towards council tax, and that was the premise of that. But leaving aside the fact that we've said, you know, that got significant pushback, so it is, you know, it's history. But creating more bands within the council tax system itself is an inherently progressive thing to do, because you're then having it more directly related to the value of properties, and there's not these cut-off points that the current system has. So it would be smoother over a number of bands. So I would be keen, as part of the discussion about, you know, can we create political consensus. I mean, it's a pretty modest change, to be honest. And I would hope that we would be able to agree that, you know, that creating more bands within the system would help make the system a bit more progressive, and it's you know, would be part of a wider set of reforms. Okay.
Turning to revaluation itself and whether it can be a tool to make it all fairer. The Scottish Government's framework for tax document that came out in 2021 had the broad principle that taxes should be levied in proportion to taxpayers' ability to pay. So we know that. Yeah. Does the Government still ascribe to that vision to try to embed that at the heart of any new system? And how can we use, let's call it, the tool of revaluation to deliver that fairness?
Well, the principle absolutely holds, and that was the principle set out in numerous iterations of how we see tax. It should be based on a ability to pay. The property element, though, of council tax, I think, is important, and that was the Commission's recommendation from 2015. Now, there are subtleties there. Does a property always tell the full story of the income of people living? No, it doesn't, but there is a correlation. But the council tax reduction schemes, of course, are there to help recognise some of that. So single person discount is one example. I'm really clear, though, if we're going to land this in a positive space, we have to begin to talk about, very, very substantial transition schemes. So out of, and I guess the technical work around this will be important as well. But if you take the IFS analysis, they are saying that 60% would stay the same, 20% would be better off, and there would be 20% who would be the losers, if you like. And I think what will be really important if we're going to build political consensus, and this is my very strong view, with not just political consensus in Parliament, but with the public, there'll have to be some very, very strong transitional arrangements that smooth out that position, potentially over a number of years. There are, looking around the world, there are other jurisdictions that have done things to give a very, very soft landing. So in, I think, British Columbia, I've got a 10-year deferral that someone can defer the impact of that for 10 years, at which point their property may be sold. And at the point of sale, I would think there'd be political consensus that the change would be made at the point of sale. So there are 101 ways of making sure that there is a soft landing and transitional arrangement for people who would be in that. It might not even be as high as 20%. That's IFS, but it could be lower. It could be significantly lower than that. But I think we need to, and I would want to be really upfront that we would want to absolutely address and have no cliff edges for anybody in a situation like that, and that give maximum reassurance. Now, that would require us to work with local government around what the cost of something like that is, and that would need to be recognised. But I guess I'm just trying to anticipate where the tricky, sticky bits will be, and we've got to be able to resolve those, because if we don't, we're not going to move forward. So we just need to try to find a way of reassuring that we're not just aware of it, but we would actively create very, very substantial transitional arrangements.
Okay. Lastly, beg your pardon.
Katie wanted to come in.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to sort of add in on this one. I mean, clearly the landscape of reform has been set out by previous bits of work, and certainly fairness absolutely has to be at the heart of this. Re-evaluation is one that, again, has come out very strongly from COSLA leaders, and in part that's to ensure that our tax base is actually built on evidence and is robust, so we can then move forward. I've been invited to sit on the Cabinet Secretary's Tax Advisory Forum, and again, these themes of fairness are ones that come throughout our dialogues and discussions within that space. And I think it is fair to reference that collection rates on property tax are, they're very high. On average, they're around about 96% collection rates. So, this is a system that works, but we want to ensure that it is as fair as possible. And the starting point for that, certainly from a local government point of view, is we very much see that in in terms of that re-evaluation and fairness. The only other point I would make, and it's looking at the ability to pay, and we do have various discount schemes, and we need to ensure that those are still fit for purpose as well. So these are all the types of conversations, the areas that we want to explore and use this really exciting opportunity to have that engagement with the public over the summer to conclude by the end of this financial year.
Yeah, thanks for that. Katie, just finally a point from me. You probably heard everyone at the previous committee saying that re-evaluation must happen, because it's 1991 and so on. Should that necessarily happen in and of its own if we can't get agreement on a replacement council tax system, or does it need to be meshed together?
So my worry is we could spend an eternity talking about a full replacement to the council tax, and because that then creates more areas of difference, that we end up just debating backwards and forwards, because we've kind of have over a number of years been in that position, and I guess I've just kind of ran out of kind of patience for that, to be honest, and have become, and I'm a pragmatist by nature, I think, and I just think if we can, rather than just make no progress, why don't we just see if we can make some, and even if it's quite modest, better that than nothing. And now in the future there may be a different landscape and there may be different views, and there may end up being consensus around a complete replacement to the council tax, and that's great, but in the here and now I don't think that's what's on offer. I think there's just too much scope for division there, so that's just, instead of debating that, let's look at where there might actually be areas of agreement and just move forward with those. And actually, if we could do something about 1991 property values in a way that is pragmatic, practical, and with consensus, then I think that's better. It's progress rather than nothing.
Katie, Councillor Hagman.
That's fine.
If all we get is re-evaluation, is that
what's that? Sorry.
If all we get out of this is a re-evaluation process, would that be worth it?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a level of frustration because we spend an awful lot of time talking, and again, leaders are very clear. Re-evaluation is something that they want to see. So, absolutely echo the sentiments of Cabinet Secretary there. We need to make progress on this, and again, this is something that I'm hearing from all the political parties in my role as resources spokesperson when I'm meeting with finance leads from all parties. There is a real sense and a desire. So, I think that's on all of us to come together, and yet we may not agree on all aspects of this, but if we can at least agree on some of the principles and what we're trying to achieve, which comes back to this element of fairness, then absolutely, let's see what we can do.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Willie. I just wanted to pick up on that 20% IFS figure. That that's what they've identified as potentially the losers. In part of your collaboration, your work together, are you going to be trying to kind of dig into that data and really get an understanding of what that percentage really is?
Yes, we are, because it could be much lower than that, actually. And I think so. The technical work that will go on will give us much more information. I don't know, Ellen, do you want to say something about that?
I can do it briefly. The first stage of this process is that we are going to commission independent analysis and modelling, which will dig into creating our own data set essentially and updating that as to the extent as possible, which will enable us to test that against the IFS reports, to just compare and contrast, dig into that, and it will provide the basis for the work that we'll then undertake through the public engagement. So we're going to dig into that, but also do our own independent modelling as well.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good one of the good next steps. Yeah. I'm going to bring in Mark Griffin.
Thanks, Kabina. In the framework for tax document that Willie Coffey mentioned, the government states, I'll just read out what it says: we are committed to reforming council tax to make it fairer and working to oversee the development of effective, deliberative engagement on sources of local government funding, including council tax that will culminate in a citizens' assembly. Now, can I just ask why, when that document was published in 2021, then why it's taken more than 3 years to get that engagement process up and running?
I mean, I think it's a fair challenge, and I think probably part of the concern perhaps was what's going to come out of the end of that. Would it actually give us anything new without building some political consensus in advance of that? I think the public element of consultation can take many forms, and I think as long as it's there and it's local and it's really led by local government particularly, I'm not sure it necessarily requires a particular format, whether it's a citizens' assembly or anything else. So I think making sure that that is done in a way that gives us the same level of engagement with the public. Why wasn't it done more quickly? I think it probably was because there was there was a bit of scepticism maybe of whether or not anything would change out of that event to move us forward. And I think that's why I've taken position now that we need to get this in the right order. And the right order is, can we build political consensus that could land changes in an environment that's actually going to happen, rather than us debating what the future of the council tax is to replace it with something that no one's going to agree upon, would have been my, I guess, the worry. So reflecting, yeah, we probably have just been, yeah, that's my honest reflection of why we've probably not made the progress since 2021 that maybe we would have liked.
Anything to add, Councillor Hagman?
Yeah, I mean, I won't touch upon the element of citizens' assembly, but certainly in terms of deliberative engagement, we have made a commitment to publicly engage going forward over the summer, and that will include, well, the hope is that it will include town hall events, going out to the community and speaking. So in that effect, we are deliberately going out to try and engage. I think it's really important that we don't, or that we recognise we're not starting from a blank slate, which, essentially, if you're coming forward with a new proposal, a citizens' assembly is a fantastic and wonderful vehicle to go, right, where are we going to go with this? I think, as it's been referenced at several points, there's a huge amount of work, there's a huge amount of evidence that has already been gathered. So rather than look backwards to start with a blank slate, we're really keen to build on what evidence we have already got. But that's not to say that, engagement and deliberative engagement is not going to be, part of that going forward. And it is vital, absolutely, that, the public feel part of this journey with us.
We heard last week at committee, what you're saying is absolutely right, that engagement with the public is vital, but actually the message needs to be clear on what we're engaging on, what the proposed outcome will be, what change we're offering the public. I think Cabinet Secretary, I think you probably encapsulated most people's feelings on it. Almost everybody has run out of patience with talking about council tax reform and the kind of unfair council tax rhetoric. Everybody's fed up hearing about it. We just want to do something about it. Is there a risk that we go out for another round of engagement, nothing happens again, and we're at a real risk of getting to the point where everybody just is so fed up with talk about council tax reform that we're getting to the last chance still in here to reform, and it just ends up in a basket of too difficult to do.
So I want to avoid that, and I think you make a fair challenge, and I think if we were to go out and say council tax, discuss, I think that would be exactly where we would probably end up. However, we've still the joint working group and COSLA leaders have still to narrow down the content of that engagement activity before going out. And I think my view, and it would be interesting to hear views from the committee as well, would be that the more specific around how do we make it more progressive, what do people think about additional bans? What do people think about transitional arrangements, to begin to get into a little bit more of what might it be, rather than just council tax, discuss. Now, you know, that's not to be so narrow that, you know, it becomes, well, this is your choice, take it or leave it. But there is a balance to be struck here. And I think people need to get a sense of this is there is something here that could emerge out of the end of it that's going to help with the manifesto setting of a landing space that could be got on and progressed in the next Parliament, that actually people would see some tangible outcome from. So I share your worry. I think if it's too broad, I think that's potentially where it could end up. And we don't want that. I think the public would expect something a bit more, well, these are the kind of areas that we think could land the political consensus, because without that, the legislation's not going to go anywhere. So there has to be a kind of reality check, and that needs to inform our thinking of what goes out to the public. I don't, Katie, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I can just add in that, you know, clearly any consultation that we're doing, any engagement, we have to have a clear ask. What is it that we're taking to the public? I think there is also a responsibility on us all to ensure that that is accessible and that we are actually reaching a broad range of views. Because, you know, as again, I'm sure you're all well aware, when you're seeking public responses, often there's a self-selecting group of people that will come forward. And again, we only need to look at the multiplier consultation to basically just a small dig into that data, and you see that the vast majority of people that responded to that consultation were those at the higher bands of council tax. So there is a real responsibility here that if this is going to be meaningful, and we absolutely are committed for that, we have to ensure that it's accessible, and it does. We reach everybody, because, as we said at the very start, council tax, everybody pays this. It's not just one part of society that is, you know, eligible for council tax.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Just picking up on the scope of the engagement. In our session on, I think it was the 18th of February, the idea of percentage came up, and I wondered if that's something that you would consider talking to people about, because there's challenges with that, and no one's necessarily advocating it, but from what was shared in that session, it could be more proportionate, potentially fairer. If instead of the banding system, you actually worked a percentage system. But I wonder if that's something you'd be willing to kind of open up to that engagement process, so people really understand that banding's not the only way. It might be the way we end up, but that there are other options.
I think we've yet to look at, you know, narrowing down the details. I wouldn't want to be overly prescriptive, but I just would, my worry would go back to my worry that I expressed earlier on, and that is that going to be more likely to be an area of division rather than an area of consensus? Mm-hmm. So adding more bands and making the council tax banding system more progressive feels to me instinctively an area that we're more likely to build consensus upon. I think there's also the complexity of delivery. Anything that is a major change and is a completely new system is going to be very complex, and it's going to take a lot of time and resource effort to do. So I think there would have to be quite a lot of advantages to doing that, rather than perhaps building on the system that we already have, where the systems are set up around. I would be more drawn towards incremental improvements rather than trying to do something that's going to be very challenging.
Yeah, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all really interesting areas to explore. Absolutely, and this is why we have commissioned the technical experts to gather that evidence that Ellen referred to there, because we need to be basing this on evidence, and we need to be able to take the advice from the experts on the room, round the room on this, because again, it's about what can we achieve in the time period that we've got, because again, we don't want to be sitting here in a year's time and not have achieved anything at all. So while there's lots of areas that we could go and explore, we're just at the point of just steadying. Let's see where we can and actually be informed by that technical expertise, which is why it was really important that we commissioned that piece of work, which is about to begin. We've not quite got there yet. Maybe we'll have to come back once that's been done.
Yes, well, certainly, but I'm very glad to hear that you're saying we don't want to be here in a year's time, having not achieved anything. I think there's a kind of a sense of relief around the committee and potentially people who are watching, our adoring fans watching. But I'm going to bring in Emma Roddick on a couple of questions.
Thank you, Convener. The committee's heard that satisfaction with council services overall is reducing, so I wondered, will the joint working group be looking at how to deliver best value for the taxpayer to really make sure that folk are seeing where their money is going and what they're getting out of paying council tax?
Best value is really important. I think it's important that we're all, not just in local government, we're all able to show that every public service is striving to deliver the best outcomes for the resources available. And I think I mentioned earlier on some of the ways that I've seen local authorities giving more visibility to that. There is obviously best value reviews that's built into the Accounts Commission work, I think, as well, which gives a kind of transparency to it. But I think there's some local authorities, as is ever the case in all kind of areas of public life, some local authorities are better at being able to tell a story around some of these things and evidence and provide transparency than others. It's the same across all public services.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So each local authority, we get our best value audits from Audit Scotland, and that piece of work is. But it's, how accessible is that to constituents, to residents? That probably doesn't mean a whole lot to individuals. So there is a responsibility on councils to actually have some really clear communication with each and every resident. I think there is sometimes a misconnection of how much revenue council tax brings in. It's only about 18–19% of our budget, so actually it's a relatively small amount of revenue raising power, but we will do our very best with that. I think financially, councils are in a really challenging position for a whole host of reasons, and we're still living with the effects of cost of living crisis, with Ukraine crisis, in terms of the cost of fuel. There's historically a lot of reasons why councils are in challenging positions, but ultimately, and I think as budgets get tighter, there is more responsibility for councils to engage with the public, to really explain to the community what is it that we want to achieve and how are we going to achieve it and what are the priorities for your community. So more and more councils are going out and consulting with their communities around budget time, and part of that is looking at council tax. So would you rather see your safeguarding of some services with council tax going up? Would you rather your council tax went down, but then some services may have to stop if the council tax isn't able to act almost as a bit of a buffer, because it's never going to be the main source of income, but it allows that sort of local discretion. So a lot of it comes down to that communication, which does fall on councils to really be as open and as transparent as possible.
Yeah, I think that's the important part that I want to pick up on your response there, Councillor Hagman, is around people's expectations and the communication that councils have to give in terms of why different things are being prioritised. Do you feel that there's often a difference between what a council might be prioritising out of necessity and what people are experiencing in their everyday lives that makes them think the council's not running services as well as I want it to?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got a different experience with council services. Everybody's got their own priorities that they want to see. So, you know, if you've got a young family, childcare, education, you know, your school bus services or your road crossing patrols, these are all high in your mindset. You know, if you've got older adults, you're thinking about those frontline services of social care and how that's being delivered. But in the meantime, you still have to get to work and the potholes are needing fixed, or you don't have access to transport, so your public transport issue. You know, everybody has got their own priorities, and I think the challenge for local government is to really be able to lay out the expanse of services and frontline services that we are delivering across Scotland. And as I say, your council tax is, you know, it allows us to soften some of those hard edges, you know, so if we can increase slightly, and every local authority is different as well. So, you know, some of the smaller local authorities, they don't actually, the council tax doesn't bring in that much revenue raising. Other local authorities can actually get more from their council tax. So it is all about that balance. And it is a challenge, but one that we're committed to overcoming. And again, actually, to draw back to the work we're doing now, the engagement actually would allow us to explain a lot more of that as well, because it is about educating our communities too.
There's been analysis of Joseph Rowntree Foundation data that shows 17% of low-income households are in arrears with council tax, and the Scottish Government has also acknowledged there's evidence that council tax debt has increased over the cost of living crisis. To what extent is the regressive nature of the current system responsible for that situation?
I think the responsibility is probably primarily cost of living, and you see debt rising generally in a cost of living crisis, and people prioritise which bills and where they think there's going to be more immediate kind of pursuance. Sometimes is a judgment. I've spoken to constituents often who are in a difficult situation, and rightly or wrongly, sometimes people perceive the council tax as being a debt that is not going to be immediately pursued with, you know, power being shut off, or, you know, putting food on the table is more of a priority, and you know, so people will make the judgment. So I suspect that there is something about where does the council tax debt sit in a list of debts that people are wrestling with, I think is probably the first point. There's then an issue, you know, just about, well, what do we do about that? And I think that, you know, we've been, Scottish Government has been supporting a number of debt services, a lot of very good debt work going on through local government to try and support people, making sure people are entitled to what they're entitled to, making sure they know about some of the discounts and council tax reduction support that actually sometimes people don't know about. So I think all of that is really, really important to try and ensure that people get the support, and that there's arrangements made to be able to repay in a way that is sustainable. And I know local authorities have been very proactive in trying to do that. Katie, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe bring in Maren for some of the examples of where we are working with communities in terms of that debt collection. But I think it's fair to say local councils will work with individuals. It's not the case that if someone gets in arrears, they're straight to a third party for collection. So, and there is support there. And again, councils have that responsibility to signpost individuals where they are struggling. I'd say, Maren, I don't know if there's any points you want to bring in.
Yeah, just to kind of confirm that, obviously, if anyone gets into debt with their council tax, the first port of call is what support do they need to get out of that. And I think, as the Cabinet Secretary describes, there are decisions that individual makes where they prioritise sort of their debt completely understandably, and that's always considered and taken into account. In terms of your question about whether or not the regressive nature of council tax contributes to that, it probably does. If the proportion of council tax takes up a higher proportion of your income, then it will necessarily be a factor kind of within that. So.
Absolutely. Cabinet Secretary, you mentioned council tax reduction schemes, which is an important method of tackling poverty, or certainly lessening its impact. Why has the joint working group then prioritised changes to second homes and empty homes instead, and what benefit could that bring in the wider tackling poverty effort?
Well, I think there's been a prioritisation of areas that could help to address areas of policy that are very difficult for local government. So the loss of homes, in your area this is quite pronounced, but the loss of homes to the holiday sector, that in some areas of remote and rural Scotland, that there are some areas where nearly all of the homes are now second or holiday homes, and that was one of the motivation, was to be able to empower local government to do something about that. So it's a tool that local government can use, and it can also raise revenue, which has been important. So it was a dual policy objective, and I think that has been quite successful, to be honest. I think there's been a large degree of consensus around it. I think any changes to some of the elements within the council tax itself, so any areas of change in the reduction scheme, really need to be seen in the context of what we're doing more widely, I think, with the council tax. So I think we should absolutely look at it. But I think, again, we need to try and maintain consensus there. So I would be concerned about the removal of anyone's discounts, for example, because I just think it gets us often entirely the wrong kind of negative premise when you're consulting with the public. We don't want to be consulting about taking something away from somebody. I just think that gets us in the wrong place straight away. So that would be my feeling. It's not that there's not a debate to be had, but I just think if we're going to try and take people with us on this journey, we need to get it, centre it in the right place. But that's my view. Katie?
Yes, I mean, council tax reduction schemes, they're an important part of the landscape, that we're working with. And I think in terms of the stage we're at the moment, it is about that evidence gathering, and we need to look at a range of options and modelling, and really dig down as to what is it we're trying to achieve. And as has come out really clearly in the evidence that you've heard, and certainly from leaders, the evaluation appears to be at the top of that list. That's not to say that we shouldn't consider all the options, but whether they go forward at this point, I'm not sure that we can't do everything at this point, and they do remain a huge important part for individuals on that. So we do need to know what are the impacts. Let's do some modelling. Let's see what proposals might look like, and certainly what can we achieve right now.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm now going to bring in Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning again. In previous sessions, we've talked about and have had some discussion that some householders are asset-rich but income-poor. And what measures will the Scottish Government consider if revaluation leads to some lower-income householders seeing an increase in their council tax bills?
So that is really, I think, one of the things at the heart of this. We've got to address people's concerns in that regard, and I think that's where really, really strong transitional arrangements are important, that recognise that could be available to everybody in terms of no cliff edges for anyone, and you've got potentially there's lots of ways you could do it. You could do it over a number of years. So there's incremental changes, you could do referral schemes, and then you could have, on top of that, you could have recognition of the point that there'll be some people who are asset rich but very income poor, and the reduction schemes already recognise that to some degree. So a single person discount, although it's not, it's not income related, but it does recognise that. I suppose the central premise of you're trying to manage all the kind of household costs that come. So there are options, I think, and being open, and I think taking it head on and saying we recognise this as an issue, and whatever changes are made will have transitional support and relief at the heart of it, I think could help to perhaps reduce people's concerns. And I think that will be important in trying to build that consensus, but also public buy-in.
And you know, and could the council tax, as you've indicated, Cabinet Secretary, the lower income households, for example, if pensioners' households are protected in some way, that could be used with a reference to the council tax reduction scheme, if that was extended to do that. Is that something that you would consider doing or looking at?
Well, I'm not going to rule anything out at this stage around things like that. I think it will be important to kind of recognise, we first of all need to know what we're talking about, and that's where the detail that Ellen mentioned earlier on around, you know, who might need that transitional additional support, and then to take it from there and break it down. Well, who are they, and what are their circumstances, and how can we make sure that we support the position going forward? And we have some judgments to make as well around the overall system. So Welsh colleagues were very clear that one of the important things that they established from the start is it was a revenue neutral process. I'm very sympathetic to that, because I think saying to the public, actually this is about making the system fair, and doing so we recognise some people will require transitional support rather than it being a revenue raising opportunity. And I think that lands it in a different space. So again, these things need to be discussed, but I think it's important that what the purpose of this is set out clearly from the beginning. But I wouldn't dismiss some of those, and I think this is the good thing about trying to get into some of the detailed dialogue with on a cross-party basis, because it may be that these are things that are suggested that we could look at that help to build that consensus.
Certainly. Councillor Hammond, you got anything to add to that?
Not a huge amount. I guess that's where the responsibility of the joint working group. We do have to look at the modelling of potential options going forward, and we have to consider that before we go out to engage with the public. So what we're taking is based on that element of fairness, because as Cabinet Secretary said, it's not necessarily about we've all agreed that if we're going to start from a fairness point of view, this is not necessarily about revenue raising. And again, it touches back to my previous comments about ensuring that we're getting a broad range of views coming in, so that we can hear from constituents and residents with those very issues. So, I think it's on us as the joint working group to ensure that our proposals are robust.
Good. And what are the benefits of local government for a revaluation when it comes to that situation? And is there a danger that some councils could become more reliant on the General Reserve Grant and be able to raise less through the local taxation? And what would the implications be for revaluation on a broader sense for local government and the finance system that we have?
I think we'd have to look at that as part of the modelling to make sure that we were very cognizant of that, because there is, Katie referred earlier on to some of the very small local authorities and the relative value of the council tax as part of their financial base. I think that brings us into other spaces, like reform, for example. So aware, for example, that there's some really good discussions going on between Clickmanager, Falkirk, Stirling around shared services. How do we work closely together? I think in recognition that this is just one part of the jigsaw. There's plenty of other things that we need to look at that needs to be led by local authorities around how do we, in recognition of the ongoing demand for services will increase, not least in areas like social care. So how do we manage that going forward? And I think what we're discussing today is just one part of that picture. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely vital that we know, what is our tax base that we're working with, and that's where the real prize, I suppose, on re-evaluation is actually to get that really honest understanding based on evidence. Where are we today? Because it's been such a long time since that was done, and that is one of the key drivers for this. There is a very technical point, and there's lots of technical areas that we could go down. But again, it's about gathering that evidence, bringing forward those options, and actually ensuring that we do that consultation really well and properly.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Mirren.
Just to add, there is an element of redistribution of the council tax income already within the settlement. So that would have to be considered kind of as part of this as a whole. But it's exactly as has been said, it's about making that council tax base fairer across the board, and then these elements would need to be considered.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Just before I bring in Fulton McGregor with the next few questions, Katie, you mentioned that or throughout this we've been talking about modelling that's going to happen imminently, I think. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to share that with the committee. The analysis of that.
So we're just about to commission that, and certainly that will sit with the joint working group. So I couldn't be able to confirm right now, but certainly we can. Certainly, I'll maybe turn to some of our officials we've got from Scottish Government and local governments.
It will be procured as a study, so it will be published in the normal way. So it will be available publicly, and of course we'll alert the committee to that.
Great. That's
And also, if there's recommendations from your own work, we'd be keen to and try to embrace those as much as we can as part of the cross-party building.
That's very welcome. We'll after this session we'll be discussing what form we're going to communicate our findings so far. I'm going to now bring in Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the panel. Cabinet Secretary and Councillor Hagman, probably one for both of yourselves. How do you think that the Scottish Government and local government will communicate any proposed changes to council tax?
So I think it's really an important question, and that's why talking and engaging the public as part of the process at an early stage is important. The last thing we want is to have something that's viewed of doing something to the public. So we've done this thing behind closed doors and there it is, take it or leave it. That's not what we want to do at all. We want to have dialogue. Katie said it earlier on, trying to have as far a reach as possible. So it's not just about selecting who, folk who may folk who regularly respond to things like this. We want to have greater reach than that, and genuinely try to spark conversations. Now, there's a balance, because we don't want to go out and say, council tax discuss. So we'll have to frame the discussion of the type of things. So we don't want to lead people up the garden path that this is going to be some change that it's not. So we have to be clear and honest about the parameters, but genuinely look for feedback and to take that feedback on board. So I think that it's got to be the way this lands, that it's not about doing to people, it's about genuinely trying to make a system fairer. That's what, and to be really clear about that up front.
Thanks very much. Councillor Hagman, and
Yeah.
Previous exchange. Oh, sorry, were you going to come in on that?
No,
Bill?
I can come back in again.
So I was going to take you back to a previous exchange you had with Mark Griffin when you were talking about people who maybe reflect on proposals to council tax change are likely to be those who are most impacted. And the IRV Scotland also told us that they said that there's real risks any efforts to reform will be, and I quote, ambushed by those who will be disadvantaged. Is that something that you think can be mitigated? How do you think that risk can be mitigated? I wonder if you were going to also answer the first question, you could just link it in. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, we have to be aware of these pitfalls that we could fall into, you know, and certainly we are, you know, we understand that this is going to generate a lot of interest. And I think that's where, you know, going back to your first point about the communication of this is going to be absolutely vital. I think, you know, there is a joint commitment, Scottish Government and local government doing this together. I think that gives us strength in itself. We have to have a clear communications plan, and we have got, you know, a huge advantage in the fact that local authorities communicate regularly and often with the community. So we have got a network of engaging with our communities that we can tap into, and it's how we can utilise that to the best possible way. Because, yeah, as we say, there will be groups of people that may feel that they want to really make their points very forceful, but we need to make sure that we listen to everybody's voices on this one and not just the ones that shout the loudest. And ultimately, we need to be really guided by, well, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And we keep looping back to this key nub, which is about the fairness of this tax that everybody pays.
Yeah, okay. Cabinet Secretary, do you think there's any lessons to be learned from how the Scottish Government has developed and implemented reforms in other areas of taxation, such as non-domestic rates, sale BTT and income tax? Is there any lessons that can be learned from the processes around those for any council tax proposals?
I mean, I think inevitably there will be, and you will seek to draw on, you know, what has worked well in terms of communication and where communication could perhaps have been better. I think the main thing here, because of the complexity of the system, is to be really clear from the outset what it is that we're trying to achieve here, and what the options are to meet that objective. And I think if we can draw on, you know, what's worked elsewhere, not just in terms of what Scottish Government has done, but I referenced earlier the work that has been done in Wales and in other jurisdictions around, you know, this area, and I think we could certainly draw on some of that. But we need to get it right for Scotland at the end of the day, and that's our responsibility to land this in the right place that gets the, you know, that has the best chance of it producing something that's useful for us all.
Thanks, Cabinet Secretary. Moving on to the other line of questions around resources and potential costs. And Professor David Heald suggested that the costs of re-evaluation in Wales could be used as a starting point for estimating the cost of re-evaluation here in Scotland. So do you think, given the difference in number of households, do you think that a cost of around £25 million is a fair estimate? You maybe heard that from the session last week.
Yeah, I mean, there will be a cost, and we absolutely need to recognise that, and then there may be an ongoing cost around, you know, is it a system that is going to be updated, and what would the timeframes between that be? So there will be an investment that needs to be made. We can start, you know, basing that around the Welsh experience is not a bad starting point, I think, but it will require investment.
Okay, thanks. And,
Do you want to come in? Sorry.
oh, sorry.
I would just also refer to the fact that we would look to the Scottish assessors, who you also saw last week, to give us a cost.
Yeah.
And they've given us some ideas, but clearly it will depend on the specification of any revaluation before they could accurately cost that exercise. And important to take account not only of the revaluation itself, but also the role of assessors and the cost of an appeals process after that. And I think either Heather or her colleague who was with her will have mentioned that when they were with you last week.
Well, thanks very much for that, because you've actually predicted my next two questions, which was
always,
really good. So that was quite impressive. So I was going to ask if you've looked at you think how many assessors might be needed to carry out a re-evaluation, and just to double that up, if what the potential impact could be on the appeals system. You've begun to touch on that, but I don't know if there's anything else anybody wants to say on that.
Yes.
We will be led by the expert views of the Scottish assessors, so we'll take the view from Heather, who's got the chair at the moment, and we'll be led by their view about how many assessors would be required to undertake that exercise. The timing of a revaluation on council tax and the timing of the work they do on non-domestic rates will factor into that in terms of the amount of additional capacity they will need, because in any exercise, given the duration of a council tax exercise, given the time since the 1991 exercise, would almost certainly coincide at some point in that cycle with the 3-yearly NDR evaluation. So we'll take a view from them on the capacity that's required to deliver both those exercises with the minimal risk, obviously, to either of them. And similarly, around appeals, we'll take a view from the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service about what the local tax chamber would require in order to support an appeals process effectively alongside the capacity of assessors.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'm now going to move on to questions from Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and officials. Back in January, Cabinet Secretary, you told the committee of your intention to publish the fiscal framework alongside the local government settlement next month, and this is me quoting, if you could reach an agreement on it with COSLA. We've now surpassed that point. Would yourself or Councillor Hagman be able to give us an update in terms of any conversations or progress that's been made?
I think we've made demonstrable progress on the fiscal framework ahead of the 25-26 budget. I think that's been acknowledged. So the way the budget has been negotiated and discussed between ourselves and local government has been transformed. I think Katie and I have had about 15 meetings in and around the budget. It's been quite resource intensive. There's been a sort of open book approach, and I think the principles of the fiscal framework have underpinned that. So it's kind of almost, it's been put into practice, the principles of the framework. I'm really keen to publish a version of fiscal framework jointly with COSLA, but we need to get agreement around that. Those discussions are ongoing, and I think that's where things have got to. Ellen, but we're keen to move forward on that. Katie?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So certainly a fiscal framework is certainly one that COSLA leaders are still very keen to progress. We are working on that. I think, I wasn't aware that it was 15. I knew that there had been a lot of meetings and in terms of the run-up to budget, and certainly my officials and everything that I've heard is that it's been a much more open engagement that has ever been in the past, and there's been shared learning on both sides, both from local government officials and Scottish Government officials, and certainly being able to have that discussion has been really, really helpful. We will continue to work closely on this one because there's a lot to be gained from that, and certainly it is something that is, fundamentally part of the Verity House agreement that we want to progress. I think there is always an expectation that people would like to see these things done yesterday, but they take time. There's a level of complexity that I think nobody fully understood that it would actually take forward. But, you know, we're absolutely committed to that, and we will continue to have that dialogue. I can't give you we're going to have something to present next week as such, because it is just a significant piece of work, and there's a lot of capacity that we need to put into that as well.
No, thank you very much for that. And if I may, just with one final question, and I've listened carefully in terms of the responses that have been given this morning in relation to reaching consensus and, you know, making sure that discussions are being had with various different political parties. But if we can remember that there has been periods where the party of government has had a majority, and Cabinet Secretary, I'm wondering why at that point in time that you didn't look at council tax reform, because therefore you wouldn't have needed that political consensus, and that would have been something that you would have been able to have moved forward with if you wanted to.
I mean, it's a fair challenge. I think, you know, my own party has, looked at various options for replacement of the council tax, and for a period, you know, we were focused on looking at whether there could be a local income tax alternative. The problem, though, was it didn't raise enough money. And I think we have essentially, you know, concluded that, as the Commission did in 2015, that you need a property element of local taxation. I guess, you know, we're certainly in where we are now, and is in a parliament of minorities. So the only way to move forward at this stage is to try and build that consensus. I also think that in something as fundamental as this, even if we didn't have to build a consensus, I still think it would be the right thing to do, because at the end of the day, we don't want this to be seen as something that we have developed behind closed doors. Here it is, take it or leave it. I just don't think that would land, even if we were able to, it would land in the right way. This has got to be something that stands the test of time. That can be, you know, incremental, sensible changes that can create a fairer system that might not be perfect, but that people feel is much better than what we have at the moment, and keen to continue those discussions.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Camilla.
Thanks very much for that. I just wanted to pick up on, so we talked about the 20% and trying to kind of dive into that detail and determine how many people really are going to be affected. In terms of the engagement piece, I'd be interested to understand how you're going to approach, because we also talked about the number of people who are in arrears. And I just wondered what you're thinking about, or if you've got to that place of how to engage with folks who are in arrears, and also the kind of people who have lived experience of struggling with council tax, and the people that are the most vulnerable in Scotland.
I think it's a very fair question. The Joint Working Group is working through the detail of what we're going, you know, what's going to be asked, but also how we're going to consult. And I think that's an important point, that it's not going to be optimal if it just goes out and let's see who responds. So I think there are ways through, you know, networks of support. Local government has a lot of networks where they're in contact with the very people you're talking about who may be struggling with council tax, arrears and debt, and there may be ways through some of those organisations, third-party organisations, to elicit views that might not otherwise be given. I think that's something, Convener, we'll take away and think about further. Katie? Yeah.
No, absolutely, and we have our next meeting this afternoon, so all this is going to be really fresh in our minds going forward. And I think it is really helpful to be able to have the debate here today. So thank you for inviting us, and we will take these comments back with us. We're not at the stage that we've developed some firm plans, but you know, absolutely, your questions here have been really helpful in helping us guide where we go next with this.
Yeah. Great. Well, that concludes our questions. And whoever organised your diary to have a meeting this afternoon, it was thinking really well there. So many thanks for you joining us this morning. I think it has been a helpful discussion. And I'm going to briefly suspend business to allow for you to leave the table.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. The next item on our agenda today is to consider two negative instruments, the first of which is Cost of Living, Tenant Protection, Saving Provisions, Scotland Regulations 2025. Do members have any comments on the instrument? No, nobody has any comments. Is the committee agreed that we do not wish to make any recommendations in relation to the instrument? Thank you. And the second instrument under consideration today is the Local Governance Scotland Act 2004 Remuneration Amendment Regulations 2025. Do members have any comments on this instrument? No, we have no comments. Is the committee agreed that we do not wish to make any recommendations in relation to this instrument? We're agreed. Thank you. And we previously agreed to take the next items in private. So as that was the last public item on our agenda for today, I now close the public part of the meeting.